We have a few more folks joining us. We'll allow them to take their seats. Take your time, Cynthia. I'm just kidding. I've missed seeing people in person. Oh gosh, for so long. It's so good. So good. Feels good to have a mic in my hand and be on stage. I'm just kidding. This is not my time. This is your time. This is your time. No, but really, it is so great to see people in person. Thank you all for being here. I know some of you are here because you're in photo classes, and some of you are here, one of our deans is here because he loves art, so thank you for that. But yeah, and everyone that's joining us remotely, thank you for that too. I want to introduce Marilyn Walligore. And I asked her if she wanted me to read a formal bio. And she kind of said I could do whatever, which is risky. Because this woman has been in my life since 2005, and she's been many things to me. So I thought, okay, I can talk about all of her accolades. I could go, there's a list of accomplishments and exhibitions and awards, and she's on every committee in the university, literally every single one. And then I thought, yeah, but that's kind of boring, because then you don't really know the person, who she is. And when we were coming over here, they're like, oh, what are you going to say? I was like, I'm going to say she's a champion. I mean, yeah, you can clap for that. Yeah. It's true. Anyone who has had a personal encounter with Marilyn Walligore would say she's a champion. She's a champion of her students. Yeah, which several of us are here. Former students, she continues to be our champions well after we're out of the program. Her colleagues, this university, and SPE. She's the reason I'm as involved in SPE that I am. I'm sure several other of you would say the same thing. And because of that, I guess she gets to watch us grow, and a lot of us don't leave the nest, which is fun. We stick around so that she can continue to take care of us, which is fine. But she is, and I don't want to say she single-handedly organized this conference, because I don't want her to think that I'm being dramatic, but anyone who was also on the committee would probably say she single-handedly organized this conference. And she did it with 2020 in mind, and then 2020 didn't happen, so she patiently waited. We got a new dean, and she held his feet to the fire and said, we will do this conference, and here we are. And it has been wonderful. Thank you, all of you who joined online. Thank you, all of you who joined online, who are still there. I'm pointing to the camera. That's who's out there. Colette looked. I'm like, that's who I'm talking to. So thank you. Thank you, because you do. You keep bringing great programming to UTD. You keep sending us, your students and colleagues, out into the world to try and do the best we can. And hopefully we make you proud. But this, again, not about me. This is about you. Anyway, so I'm going to welcome her to the stage so that she can introduce our keynote speaker that we are so happy is here. But I'll let you be doting on Ms. Huckaby. So, Marilyn Walligore, please welcome her.
That's a tough act to follow. Well, that was very, very kind, very sweet. I really appreciate your comments. And I'm just really lucky to be here and to work with such a great group of colleagues and group of friends through SPE. And it's really been an amazing 2 days. And we've explored the topic for the conference, looking at different strategies, innovative perspectives in terms of thinking about photography and how it's changing. And I learned a lot. So I really want to thank everyone for submitting proposals, for submitting work for review. We had students, student work is in the gallery, and it's just been a lovely experience. And I really want to thank everyone also for all their comments online, because I think all of us during this period of the pandemic have missed community. we've missed seeing work. Some of us are talking at the gallery that we really miss seeing work firsthand. And this is an attempt to slowly move back in that direction. So, and of course, I want to thank my colleague, Diane Durant, and she did a wonderful presentation today on our Comer Collection exhibition. So I know, unfortunately, it wasn't available for you to see today, but when you come back to campus, I hope that you'll check it out. And also, be aware we have future programming, and we're trying to bring in photographers every year, so please come back if you're here today. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, who we are thrilled to have join us this evening, I wanted to talk a little bit about the conference committee, who, without their help, this would not happen. I know Diane used the word single-handedly, but I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times during this process I'm like, oh, thank God. Thank God Emily and Marcy and everyone was there, Diane, Ariel, Anna, Cynthia, to keep us moving along, because there were so many things to do. From the very beginning, Diane jump-started the planning process, and Ariel Wilson continued the process. I'm much more savvy with Google Forms than I ever thought I could be. Discussions with conference committee members, Anna Fritzl and Cynthia Miller, moved the selection process forward, so I thank you guys for your insights. Emily Loving devoted time to coordinating the membership exhibition, while Marcy Palmer and Daniel Ray Martinez organized our portfolio review. So there were so many efforts across the process of organizing this conference that I'm really indebted to everyone's assistance. Chris Ireland, he's not here, but I did see him online. I think I saw he made a comment somewhere. He shared his insights that he gained when he co-organized the conference in Waco a few years ago, and I really want to thank Chris. That was there was an incredible amount of information he shared that was helpful. And then Vice Chair, SPE South Central Vice Chair Rebecca Drolin was a great communicator. I understand she's moving on, but she really helped with the promotion of this conference. SPE Administrative Director Tony Roberts was available like 24/7 the last few days, so we are indebted to her. She's so wonderful, kept us on track and connected. And we also benefited from Amanda Breitbach, who's the SPE South Central Treasurer, and of course the chair of SPE, Scott Hilton, who's right there. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, everybody. Cynthia, I think I see Anna's over here, and Marcy's right here. So did I miss anybody else who's here? Of course, Diane. So. Here on campus, I'm really dependent on the staff here. Events Director Christy Barris helped us navigate all the complex campus planning, especially during COVID. We also had support from staff Dina Davis and Holly Miori. The wonderful gallery installation was done by gallery manager Brian Scott. Did a beautiful job under very tight deadlines, so you wouldn't really be aware of that, because it's a beautiful installation, and I think everyone's work looks fantastic. We had students involved. Jay Dotson helped to print the student work, and volunteer Lauren Allen photographed this evening at our reception. And of course, we're able to enjoy the wonderful member show curated by Christopher Belay, which is memorable. Funding, of course, facilitated by our dean, Nils Romer of the School of Arts and Humanities, who unfortunately could not join us tonight because he's traveling. We also had several generous cornerstone sponsors, including Frame Destination, Aperture Rent, the School of Arts and Humanities on behalf of the Comer Collection, and Red River Paper. And I should mention that Red River Paper is our sponsor for this evening's lecture by Letitia Huckaby. And certainly her experimentation with the presentation of photography and combination of media is an excellent fit for this conference, and certainly demonstrated by her work, which is recently on view at Tally Dunn, and I hope that some of you had a chance to enjoy it. It was really amazing. Letitia Huckaby has a degree in journalism from the University of Oklahoma, a BFA from the Art Institute of Boston in photography, and her master's degree from the University of North Texas in Denton. She's exhibited as an emerging artist at Phillips New York, the Tyler Museum of Art, the Studio School of Harlem, the Camden Palace Hotel in Cork City, Ireland, and the Texas Biennial at Blue Star Contemporary Art Museum. Her work's in several well-known collections: the Library of Congress, McNay Art Museum of Southeast Texas, and the Samella Lewis Contemporary Art Collection at Scripps College in Claremont, California. Letitia Huckaby has been very busy during the pandemic, so we are all envious of her momentum, and certainly we're looking forward to hearing more about her work tonight. She was a featured artist in MAP 2020, The Further We Roll, The More We Gain at the Amon Museum, and State of the Art 2020 at the Momentary and Crystal Bridges Museum, both which opened in the spring of 2020. She was also a fall 2020 artist in residence at ArtPace. And tonight her lecture is Letitia Huckaby, A Metamorphosis. So please help me in welcoming Letitia Huckaby.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me all right? Oh, I can stop fogging up my glasses now. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Marilyn and Diane, for that wonderful introduction. Her face did get red. You were right. I was watching to see if she would get red, and she did. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so excited that you all came to hear this talk about my work. I think she's going to dim the lights. So my start to photography was kind of an odd path, but I think most photographers don't go like, they're not born like, oh my God, I need a camera to live my life. You know, it's always some sort of interesting story. And mine actually started with dance. When I was in high school, I was lucky enough to go to the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute. And it's a program where, at that time, it was just for Oklahoma students, and you compete to get into the spots. And I competed in dance and went in modern dance, but there were kids there. There was a whole like youth orchestra. There was mime. There was acting. There was writing and poetry, and they had photography. And it was the first time I saw photography as an art form and not as a news report or somebody trying to sell you something, right? And it really sort of captured my attention. They were doing the whole darkroom thing and developing their own film, and I just thought it was fabulous. And so I went to Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute twice. That's me there in the center. And I told my parents when it was time for me to go to college that I want to be a photographer. And they were like, not if we're going to pay for it. We need you to have a 401k and a retirement plan and all this stuff. So when I went to school the first time, I ended up in journalism with an emphasis in advertising. I thought that was as creative as I was going to be able to get on my parents' dime. And after I graduated, I worked for a radio station as the promotions coordinator. And I went back to the Oklahoma Summer Arts Institute to help them with their PR. And there was a gentleman there by the name of Christopher James. And he had an exhibition, and it was about his work that he had done in India. And this photograph changed my whole life. This photograph right here. This is in a death hotel in India. It's a space where people who can't afford a nice place to die can go, and their family can visit them there in their last days. And the gentleman is laying basically on a cement slab, And the smoke that you see around his face is from a candle that was lighting the room. And at the moment that he took the picture, the smoke went into the man's nostrils and just kind of hovered around him. And Christopher James got the shot. And I was so moved by this photograph. It reminded me of an image I had seen as a child. I'm sure all of us at a certain point in our life, there was a moment when you recognized art. My dad was in the military, and we spent 2 terms of duty in Germany before I hit middle school. And my mom was a big history buff. So she was obsessed with World War II. So vacations meant going in and out of concentration camps, going to the Eagle's Nest, and all these different things. And the first image I remember seeing was a drawing that one of the inmates at the concentration camp had done with a piece of coal that he was supposed to use to warm himself with. Sorry, I'm getting a little choked up even thinking about it. But he drew another inmate's portrait. And I had the same reaction then as I did to this image. And Christopher James was there to give a talk. This was his talk. It was called Christopher James, A Chronological Path of Influences and Specific Bodies of Work, How One Odd Thing Leads to Another Over the Course of a Career. And as I was researching for this talk, you know, I'd already told Marilyn it was going to be called a Metamorphosis, but I saw this, and this was the first artist talk I'd ever heard, and it's the thing that shifted my whole life. And I thought, man, why didn't I name my talk Letitia Huckaby, Chronological Path of Influences? And that sounds good. But the more I got to thinking about it, it should have been called Shifting, because my whole path has been this sort of like shift from one thing to the next. And I've sort of gotten good at just, when the door opens, step through that door. And I hope that if there's anything you get from this talk today, is that you'll be able to see how those moments when they come up and present themselves. Because I think if we're honest, those of you that are photographers, and maybe not all of you are, we tend to be a little bit anal. A little bit, just a little bit. We have it like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. This is how I'm gonna accomplish it. This is the equipment I'm going to use, right? And then we stick right there. But when I saw that image of Christopher James's work, I quit my job at the radio station, sold my car, met a roommate online in the 90s, and she wasn't a serial killer, and moved to Boston to study under Christopher James, because he had such a huge influence on my life. I thought, I want to be like that guy. So I went to Boston, and I did 2 projects while I was there. I fancied myself a documentary photographer. I thought for sure Magnum was going to swoop me up the moment I graduated. The first project I did was on this historic jazz club called Wally's that was on the Chitlin circuit back in the day. And what I did is I would go during the day and photograph the quote-unquote old cats that kind of hung out for decades. They were friends of Wally's. His daughter was running the space. At nighttime, it was a totally different scene, but during the day, it was just these old guys that like to hang out together, and the idea of telling their story really intrigued me. It taught me how to build trust, because at first they were very leery of me taking their pictures. Some days I would go and just hang out, have a drink, talk. Maybe I would only take 1 picture, you know? And some days I would get lucky and get several pictures taken. The second project I did while I was there, and one other thing, Christopher James said that this project was better than Robert Frank. Okay, we can move on. The second project I did was with this organization called the Toff Center for Dance, and they worked with inner city kids. And they would go to their schools and allow them to take dance as a PE elective, and then they would kind of look for kids that had a natural inclination toward dance and then invite them back to study at the studio. So the images that I took were at their studio, but they were right across the alley from the Boston Ballet. And so what you're seeing here is one of the Toff's kids looking out of the window into the Boston Ballet studios, and they've got the girls upstairs and the boys downstairs. They've got the dueling piano players going on. It wasn't anything like that in the Toff Center, but it was something wonderful for them to be exposed to that world and to see that. So this is where I started, and I think you can see as I go through my work, some of this stuff is carried over even though my work has drastically changed. Some of the color palette I think is very much the same. This is, for those of you who care, this is portrait film. I shot portrait film for all of my street work and just really thought I was doing something at this phase, you know. You can see this silhouette kind of come up in my work today. The work that she mentioned at Tally, I think, really speaks to even images like this. So then I went to grad school, and I had a Marilyn, but her name was Dorneth. And Dorneth was my champion to steal from Diane. And she just let me run wild with whatever I wanted to do. Right before I started graduate school, my father passed. And he was from a small town in Mississippi that was the 4th largest producer of cotton. And I grew up under the wing of an Army officer. Nobody really messed with me. You know, everything is sort of arranged by rank on the base, and my dad at one point was second in command on the base, so I didn't really deal with a lot of racial tensions. But when my father passed away, I started thinking about things because his mother's neighborhood was surrounded on 3 sides by a cotton field. The kind of things I didn't pay attention to because my parents had so sheltered me. And so I was wanting to do work and layer in more of my history. And I sort of shifted to cotton. Cotton became symbolic for my ancestry, for my lineage, for just any kind of like grounding in my work. And I would use a lot of heirloom pieces that came from my grandmother, or I tried to stick for the most part with cotton. So I started out making these quilts, and Dorneth was really great. Like, I had some other cohorts in the photo department that weren't so excited about someone sewing in the photography department. And, you know, photographers can be a little... And I had one during a critique say to me, "Oh, you're just a Betsy Ross." And Dorneth said, "Oh, no, I'll have you out of this program. You're trying to mess with her head," and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like Robert Frank. So I started by making quilts, but my documentary training, I was still sewing pictures together. You know, and there's like unspoken rules in documentary photography. You don't crop it. You leave it the way you shot it. You don't go in there and shoot 50 million pictures and just happen to get a shot. You need the decisive moment, right? So I was still dealing with all of that. Just stitching the images together to sort of build these quilts. Until I got to this image. It was the first time I said, I wonder if I could take one photograph, blow it up really, really big, and tear it apart, and have it still work, have it still hold together as an image and have power to it. So I did this one, and this is another spot where things kind of shifted. I began to play more. It's hard to see, but there's little things sewn into this one. And then I get to something like this, where all of these sections are actually photographs of a quilt that my great-grandmother made, who I never met. And it's a piece called Her Seed. And it's also got like little cutouts. And all the text in the cutouts have to deal with egg donors and who they're looking for in an egg donor, and none of the descriptions sound like me. And it's me and my firstborn child there together at the bottom of the piece. So then I'm starting to add in more angst, more quiet punches. How about that? But I'm still hungry for a sort of documentary way of working. So I shifted again. And I started photographing my mother's family, but printing them onto fabric and then framing them up. So I did this whole project. This is my grandmother's house, and it's all quilted together. And I'm looking at the quilts of Gee's Bend, so a sort of African-American aesthetic and way of quilting crazy quilts, rooftops, like this pattern is called a rooftop or housetop, where it's these concentric squares that kind of come off of them, the patches. And I'm gonna try to go through some of this kind of quickly because I made the talk a little longer than an hour, and I don't wanna keep y'all longer than I should. So this was the first time I went back to like embedding myself in a group and telling the story in my documentary style. This is the last one I'm showing in this. And this one I really love. I think it might be my favorite image out of that body of work. It was just acquired by LSU Museum of Art, but I'm outside of my grandmother's living room window shooting into the glass during that sweet light time in the evening, you know? And I get in it the reflection of her mother's house from behind me. So it's like looking into my grandmother's house with my great-grandmother's house reflected in the background. And just like the dance work that I showed you earlier, this idea of the silhouette comes in. The way I was doing these pieces was to take vintage bed sheets and have the figure behind the bed sheet with a light on them that casts their shadow onto the sheet, and then I'm just photographing from the other side. So this whole image, all of this is photograph of the sheet. Started because my mom was telling me about feed sacks and about how when she grew up, the only thing they bought from the store was those vintage, some of y'all are too young to know about this, but these vintage feed sacks that would come in these beautiful patterns, and I had started printing onto these sacks, sourcing them off of Etsy or eBay, or I found a guy who cleared out warehouses and had tons of defective sacks. But I wanted to make them bigger. They only came so big, you know, you weren't getting a 6-foot bag of flour or whatever. So that's when I started using the bed sheets that had patterns similar to those feed sacks and projecting or capturing images off of those. I'm trying to go through some of this early work just so you can get a sense of where I started. That's my baby sister. And they're all quilted and then they're hand sewn. I don't know how to work a sewing machine. I just figure this thing out as I'm going. These are some vintage sugar sacks. And I photographed my daughter. I think she was about 6 at the time. My sort of little play off of the Morton Salt girl, if she was a little black girl on a sugar sack, because obviously I got ties to Louisiana. And I did this whole series of these sacks. And then Aurora asked me to make a piece for the festival in 2013. And I already had this clothesline piece. It's called Look What a Woman's Got. And I added the projection to that. The clothesline piece is an homage to my dad's mom. And all of the images were her textiles or her mother's textiles. And I screen printed images of her over the course of her life from the time she was about 16 years old. This is her at my wedding. She was probably in her 80s there, and this is the image I took of her. That's my silhouette, and then that's my daughter. So it's sort of like this conversation across generations of the women in my family. So I made that piece for that, and then here is that piece again at the LSU Museum of Art just in the last year. So that's another thing that shifts, like the work, and you'll see that as we go through this presentation. I'll take something and maybe I think it works this way, and then I'll try it another way, and it just seems to get better as I stay open to letting the artwork take its own life. So what I'd like to do now is go through some of the more recent works. I'm gonna skip like the middle. I just wanted to show you that beginning part so you get a sense of where I was coming from. So these next few bodies of work were all done in the last 3 years, last 3 years. So 5 Paper Dolls, a contemporary tale. And some of you may remember this little poem. What are little boys made of? I remember the frogs and the snails and the puppy dog tails, right? And little girls, what are they made of? Sugar and spice and all things nice. And when I was little, I thought that was so funny. We get to be sugar and spice, and y'all are tails. You know, but as you get older, things look different, right? So I wanted to do a project that drew attention to the bombing of the church in Birmingham in '63. And so this body of work, 5 Paper Dolls, and there, as you know, there was 4 little girls that died in that bombing. And there was one little girl who was in the restroom when the bomb went off. Her sister died, but she survived it. So for me, there was 5 girls. And I did this project with my 2 daughters, and then another lady at our church has 3 little girls. So they all go to church together, just like these children did. And I photographed them thinking about everything that was going on in 2020. So I photographed them in their church dresses. That's my oldest. This one is my youngest. So that's the 5 little girls. I photographed them with their masks on, which to me was more about how we can silence the voice of children and little girls in particular, and a little bit, I'm a bit obsessed with The Handmaid's Tale. I don't know if y'all have watched it, but that DC set where they had the masks on, that was in 2017 that came out. And it just, seeing the children with their masks on like that it's kind of hard, you know. And so I was thinking about like how we don't listen to the children. We try to say, this is adult conversation, you go over there. And then of course I had to photograph them in my own, it's like conversation to my own work with these silhouettes printed on cotton fabric and embroidery hoops. This group of images of them, I was thinking about everything that was going on down at the border. So they're wrapped in those mylar blankets that they gave the babies to sleep under. They're like camping blankets. They're really thin. You can see through them if you hold them up, you know. But I would give them to the children. I'd say, just wrap yourself up in it and I'll take your picture. And they seemed to look almost like royalty when they got wrapped in them, but I was thinking about those children down there on the border. Then I gave them a protest sign. I didn't tell them what to write. I gave them a protest sign and some markers and some crayons and whatever they needed. I said, you take your time, you make your sign, and then when you come to the studio, I'll take your picture with the sign. So this little girl is about 8. She may be 9 now, she just had a birthday. And hers says, no justice, no peace, I can't breathe. And it really says to me like how woke the children are about what's going on in society. Still I rise. Black girls matter. And I didn't tell them what to wear either, because I'm a documentary photographer, right? So you just show up in whatever you want to wear. And she had on that I am all these wonderful things t-shirt. This one's hard to read because she wrote with a pen, but my skin shouldn't be a death sentence. And then for my youngest, I didn't know, she's not old enough She was probably 4 at the time. So I said, I want to make a piece that speaks to the future. We don't know what she's going to be protesting, but if it's anything like what the future has taught us, she's going to be protesting something, right? So I just gave her a blank sign and photographed her, almost like she's ready for battle. So that work shifted and became this installation at the McNay last year. It's almost been up a year. They have this wonderful program where they invite artists in to create for their entry space. So that's another example of how the work has shifted. And I have this little video. I don't know if I'll show the whole thing, but I know some of you are techie and you want to know the how-to stuff. Well, hopefully we'll end this on a little bit more positive note after talking about the church bombing, but this is a recent version of the What Are Little Girls Made Of poem that came out. What are little girls made of? Sun and rain and heart and brain. That's what girls are made of. What are little boys made of? Except for little things much the same. So boys got elevated. Girls did too. Marilyn mentioned I did a residency at ArtPace. And I did this project called And Thy Neighbor, which the title was taken from scripture in Matthew 22:36 through 40 that talks about, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. And the body of work that I worked on was portrait work on immigrants and refugees of African descent. I was really thinking about, 2020, we had all kind of stuff going on, but And I think in this country, a lot of times when we think of immigration, we automatically think of the experiences of Latin or Hispanic people. But there's a lot of people immigrating to this country, and it's a horrific experience for all of them. And sometimes it can be particularly hard for people with darker skin tones. There was one story I heard about a group of Haitians that were being deported back to Haiti while I was working on this project. Someone told me about this. And the government had put them on a plane, and they're handcuffed because they're being deported to their seat. And they sat on the tarmac for 18 hours. And then the government decided, we're not going to deport them. And they took them off the plane and put them back in detention centers. So it's some horrible, horrible things. So what I did with this project, since I was in San Antonio, all of the subjects live there. I spent the first 3 weeks of the residency just building trust and building connections. But all of these pieces are, as you can see, 70 inches on the longest side. I was still working with the embroidery hoops, but because I was at ArtPace, I was able to get extra help and resources. So we were able to make these embroidery hoops. And embroidery hoops have become sort of symbolic of home to me, because a lot of times when a woman is using an embroidery hoop, she's making something precious that she thinks is going to get passed down in the family. It's not necessarily a dish towel, right? It's something that's precious. And the idea of framing them in these hoops just spoke volumes to me. So the images are printed onto cotton fabric. And what you can't see in these images, but you would have been able to see if you were able to go to Tally, is that there's embroidery at the bottom of them. And it would say, like, this piece is Barbara, where it says Ghanaian American. Ghanaian American is embroidered into the shadow in a similar color thread, because I'm wanting you to draw closer to the piece, just like when you meet someone, in order to understand them, you have to draw closer, right? So to know more about these individuals, even looking at the artwork, you would have to physically get closer in order to see that, because it's sort of hidden into the piece. Bethley and Naika came to the United States when they were 10 years old. They had been injured during an earthquake, and the thought was that their legs were going to have to be amputated, but because they were able to come here and the medical care they were able to receive, their legs were saved. And now they're beautiful 20-somethings, like 22, and they've become best friends through that experience. Dubum 16. Juliana is like social worker. Leah and Ruben. Ruben is the only one that didn't have his American citizenship yet, and Leela is his daughter, and she's the product of his relationship with an American woman, and she likes theater. Lemmy was adopted into a family. Sadako was the first time I've worked with a real model, and that was interesting because she was just like, what do you want me to do? I brought a wardrobe change. Do you want me to take my clothes off? No! I think we got it. She was great, though. She's from Rwanda. Sho is Nigerian, and he started a festival in San Antonio called Dream Week, which is all about celebrating our differences, and he named it after the Martin Luther King speech, I Have a Dream. And he's really tall. And Stephanie and her daughter Stephanie is a seamstress, and she came dressed to the nines, and she'd already told me that she didn't want me to photograph her daughter, but she didn't realize it was silhouette. She thought I was photographing her directly, and when she saw it was silhouette, she was like, okay, you can take her picture too. So I love that piece. How many of you saw these images? I mean, what does that look like? If that doesn't look like slavery and plantations, I don't know what does. And this is in 2021. These are the way our neighbors are being treated when they're just coming for a better life, for protection. I don't know if you've ever studied like the path that they take to get here, but most of them come through Central and South America. And there's a section of it between Cambodia and, is it Panama, where there's a Darien Gap. Study the Darien Gap when you get a chance. It's 60 miles of jungle with no roads, and it's where the drug cartel and thieves and rapists all hang out. And it's treacherous to just walk it. A lot of people die drowning in water or from snake bites. They're attacked, they're abused all along the way, and it's 60 miles. They go through a lot to get here to run into that. I'm sorry. The work has gotten a little bit more political as I've gone on. So this project, A Tale of Two Greenwoods, was a body of work that I was asked to create in commemoration of the bombing in Tulsa for the centennial. These are actual postcards that people would send to each other after the bombing had occurred. These images of the area completely desecrated. Little Africa on Fire, Tulsa Race Riot, June 1st, 1921. Isn't that cool? So when I went, my intention was to do portraits similar to the And Thy Neighbor project with descendants of the original settlers. But what I ran into was a lot of generational pain. And coupled with that was the fact that Trump had recently tried to go there for a rally, and it had drew a lot of national attention to the location. And so the residents feel like now people are paying attention to us, now people want to tell our story, but nobody cared before. So they weren't as warm and fuzzy about me taking their picture. But while I didn't have the luxury of being there for 2 months like I did in San Antonio, where I could build that trust. I was going up on weekends to do this work. But one of the things I found out while I was there, the community was called Greenwood. And the reason why they had that name was because a lot of the original settlers had moved from Greenwood, Mississippi, to Tulsa to set up this community. And Greenwood, Mississippi is where my father was born and raised. And so I have personal connections and a deep understanding of what Greenwood, Mississippi is like, which if you ever go there, that's culture shock as well. It's very divided. One side of the river looks one way and the other side looks the other way. And so I decided to be authentic in my approach, I had to shift. I didn't want to cause any more generational pain, and I didn't want the residents to feel like I was taking advantage of them, so I had to tell the story from my perspective. So what I did was I did these images in Tulsa. All the Tulsa images are on the right, and then on the left-hand side are images that tie to Greenwood, Mississippi. So compared them almost like those bifold frames that people used to sit on their mantles. The images on the right are one block in Tulsa where all the houses are gone. They're not necessarily in the area that was bombed, but they're a few blocks off. And for me, they were sort of a poetic representation of what could have been or what was lost, to just see all these stairs that lead to nowhere, right? And then on the left-hand side, when I was born, we were in Germany. And so my dad would send these like old Polaroids back to my grandmother in Greenwood. Hey, here's the new baby. And on the back side, he would write things, and I scanned that and superimposed it over the front of the image. So on this one, he's saying, I'm 1 week old, and that's him and me there. This one, I'm a little bigger, and he says, Letitia loves the seesaw. We spend about 2 hours on it every day. He was obviously a loving, doting father. And then you have another set of stairs from Tulsa. And then I went back to Greenwood, and I took my mom with me. And she lives in southern Louisiana. So I drove to southern Louisiana, picked up my mom, then drove up to Greenwood and did this project, drove her back, and then came back to Texas. But it was the best thing I could have ever done, because when they met at Jackson State going to school, and she would have to drive that road to go to school, and then she would drive on, to visit him in Greenwood, which is a little bit north of Jackson, Mississippi. And it triggered all these thoughts for her that I probably wouldn't have heard these stories. And she remembered the house that my father was born and raised in. And by the time I was born, my grandparents had moved into a brick house. So I never knew this particular house. So I was able to go back, because she was with me, and photograph the block. And all the houses were painted the same color. It was like an artist's dream. It's like they knew I was coming. This is the actual house where my father grew up. And then this is the last one. This is when my sister was born. It says, the live-in babysitter likes to keep a hand on the job all the time, also kisses the baby a lot, sometimes the baby has a red spot on her cheek or something like that. And I loved how it said red spot, and then that last image from Tulsa had that little bit of red in it. It's like the art gods just lined everything up for me. So that was that project. Now I'm just going to show you one more and how it shifted. Of course, I could do this like a good old black preacher and say, I'm almost done, and really only have 45 minutes left to go. But I won't do that, because I know we got to leave time for questions, right? So this last group, Suffer Rage, started before the 5 Paper Dolls. And I reached out to artists of color, and I sent them the protest sign, just like I did with the little girls. These I actually did first. The little girls came next. And I asked them the same thing I told the little girls, but I asked them to make a protest sign based on their understanding of the word suffrage, because of the women's right to vote centennial that was coming up. And suffrage, as you know, deals with women's right to vote, but also means a series of petitions or prayers. And I didn't tell them what to do. I didn't see the sign until they came to the studio for me to photograph them. So like Andrea Toston, her piece, We Are Like Mushrooms and Weeds, So Make Room and Sleep. She had just read the autobiography of George Washington Carver and was responding to that and his sort of tenacity and not wanting to sell off the rights to his inventions, but to teach others, She was really inspired by that. And then Ari, she's a little bit more aggressive in her approach. And Jessica is biracial, and she was really wanting to deal with how if her hair is straight, she gets treated one way, but if she wears her hair curly, it's a totally different thing, and that kind of thing. So, and I had every intention of this work being presented in a gallery space. They were all printed on these vintage sacks. I used cotton sacks, some of the ones that they used to drag through the field when they would put the cotton in it, those long sacks, things like that. But the pandemic hit, and the show that it was supposed to go to didn't happen. And then I got a call from Hamida in Denver, and they were doing this thing where they were projecting images onto buildings in downtown Denver, and she wanted to use them for those. So the work kind of shifted. And sorry, that one's blurry, but these are all the test shots they sent me to show me what they were doing at night in Denver. Which I never would have, I couldn't have imagined that. And then I got invited to do the Aurora that was in Fort Worth. I don't know if you guys got to see that, but it was for the unveiling of a public art piece there in Fort Worth. It's a new tower that the city has acquired, this projection piece. That's the actual tower there in the background of my silhouette there. And so let me get out of this, and I want to show you what, it didn't work in the PowerPoint, so we had to do it this way. And just a little, before I play this, and then I'm done, I promise. I went to Tuscany. I know, awful. It was horrific. We stayed in a villa in the middle of olive groves. We suffered to do an artist residency, but as you can see, my work is so much about the African-American experience. I really didn't know what I was going to do in Tuscany. I thought, I'll just find the Black people and tell their story. It didn't really work out that way, but every morning, these birds would sing and wake me up. And I'm wearing birds in honor of this too, by the way. And so I just decided, when the birds wake me up, I'm gonna go up on the rooftop and make a recording, just for 2 or 3 minutes every morning, just with my phone. Didn't have the right equipment, I'm sure. And then when I got done with that residency, we were there about 2 weeks, and came back, and I was like, okay, now I need to research birds and figure out, how I can tie this into my work. And I found this website where scientists were now in a rush to record the songs of female birds, because all of their recordings were male birds. And I thought, dear God, even birds, even birds can't catch a break, So that's what started the whole project with the women and the protest signs, to sort of like, let's get women's voice out in some sort of collective force. So for the piece in Aurora, I combined the women's imagery with the sound of the birds. That's the last one. It just repeats itself. So, as you can see, I've shifted quite a bit over the course, and I feel like there's always these moments where you have this choice. The right choice is always a lot more work. It's a lot harder. But if you take that choice, the work will always be richer and better. And that's the lesson I've learned, and to be true to that voice inside that's sort of pulling me one way or the other. I went from a straight documentary photographer to, I don't even know what you call myself. And matter of fact, if you know Swanee, she asked me that directly, what do you call yourself? I said, Letitia Huckaby. I didn't know what else to say. But maybe photo-based mixed media artist, something of that nature. But I hope that idea of shifting came through today. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a mic here. Does anyone have a question?
How do you, on your fabric pieces with the embroidery hoops, hello, how do you choose, is there any way in particular you choose the actual fabric that goes in your embroidery hoops? Because I was fascinated by some of the fabric.
Yeah, like I'm a big Etsy shopper, and I'm looking for something that has a history in it, so it's always vintage, and it's just whatever sort of pattern that kind of strikes me at the time, and I usually buy tons of it and then filter through it when I'm going to do a shoot or whatever. But I've had people say they recognize certain patterns, and I love that. Like someone said, "Oh, my mom had that. I know that bed sheet, or I know that curtain, you know, or whatever." And so I think that helps with the connection to the work too. It's kind of a softer approach. So it's all aesthetic and history. Mm-hmm. I think there's a question in the back.
How do you get the images onto the fabric, or like how you do the quilt?
That has shifted over time too. I have broke many an Epson printer trying to trick it into taking my fabric. I had one printer, it wouldn't even take paper anymore. So when I first started, I would get freezer paper that's kind of like sticky on one side, and I would iron my fabric onto it and cut the edges real sharp like it was regular photo paper and just feed it in there. And sometimes I've even, like those sugar sacks that you saw, I would just cut the seams apart and run the vintage sack through the printer. But Cooper Lux has a flatbed that they can suck, like vacuum down things. And then the head comes across it like a 1/4 inch and shoots the dye onto the fabric. So for the vintage pieces, I often use them now to print those. But there's also a space out in California called Dharma Trading. They sell printable fabrics that come paper backed, and they're designed to go through the printer. They're wide format inkjet rolls. So I've gotten better about that now, and I've stopped breaking the printers, which Cedric is very happy about. Anybody else?
Can you talk a little about your, it seems to me very clear that you were inspired by Carol Walker.
Mm.
Is there a connection there? Is there anything that you see your work in dialogue with her work or anything like that?
I do love her work. I love, her cut paper silhouettes are amazing. I don't know that I necessarily look at her work. I'm more inspired by Betty Saar, who I was talking to somebody about that in the gallery today. And her idea of like collage and layering in of things. And of course, documentary photographers like Bernie Imes. Oh my God, I love him. And then other artists like Roy de Carava and who else? Let's see. I do like looking at Carol Walker, but she's so, like her approach is so different than mine that I don't think she inspires me in that way. Yeah.
I'm interested in the relationship between the embroidery hoops and mirrors, which I kept thinking of, even though your subjects are usually in profile, so it doesn't really have a mirror, it doesn't necessarily mirror back. But have you played upon that at all in any of the images that you didn't show us, or are you thinking in terms of that?
Like of mirrors.
Well, like a kind of an old-looking glass. Like the shape is very similar.
I've had that question asked before. I haven't looked at like mirrors, but I do think about the old like what do you call it? Is it convex glass that the photos used to come in, and that kind of thing. I'm intrigued about that, and I've been in the back of my mind thinking I was going to do some sort of contemporary version of that. And I do think about like cameos and the little jewelry. I have some of my grandmother's pieces of jewelry from that, but I haven't really done anything with mirrors or looked at that a lot as inspiration for the work.
For the signs, the young girls with the signs, how much direction did you give them, or what prompts did you give them to what kind of signs that they wrote, or what they wrote, or how they wrote?
Nothing. I dropped off blank signs and some materials and walked away. Because to me, the truth of it, their voice was important. How can I make a body of work about people's voice and then say, why don't you do this? It just seems so wrong to me to do that. And that's what was shocking to see what they came back with. Because they could have done anything. They could have drew a picture of a house and a tree, or, you know what I mean? Now, whether their mother said something to them, I don't know. By the nature of them being protest signs, it probably puts something in their mind, and it's possible that she may have said something. Like my daughter, the oldest one, she put "Still I Rise," which comes from a poem, and then the youngest one we left blank. But the other three little girls, I didn't tell them anything, and I don't know if I was more. I don't even know how I feel about that, like what they said. I want to be proud because they're aware, but at the same time, they're little girls. Why do they have to be aware of all this, So it's kind of a thing with me when I look at it.
I have a 12-year-old daughter whom I have photographed, and sometimes she's very willing and sometimes she's not.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a 3-year project together, and it was interesting to watch her grow herself through that project.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, she gave me feedback, some of which I wanted and some of which I maybe wasn't prepared for completely. But she kind of became her own person.
Yeah.
And some of that dialogue between mother and daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was seeing you photograph your kids who are farther apart in age, older and younger than my daughter, I wonder what their response is to being your subjects, or what that relationship is like, because it's mother-daughter is very different from photographer-subject, but you have that rapport, which you can maybe speak about, but I'd be interested in hearing maybe what their feedback might be.
Yeah. I guess because I've been photographing them since the moment they came out, they were a little used to it. My 13-year-old, the oldest girl, she's starting to get a little bit of a big head. Like her pieces always sell in the shows, and she's been in so many magazines and newspapers that, when I don't photograph her, she's like, what? You're not including me? I'm the hot ticket, So, and then my son has, since these last few years, you can see I'm a little feminist heavy in the work. He's like, okay, you're gonna have to do some work about boys at some point here. But when I gave a talk at the McNay for that installation, there was a woman and it was virtual, and her daughter were watching the talk. And I don't remember the age. I want to say she was like 6 or 7, but they were just sitting there eating grilled cheese sandwiches, watching the talk. And her daughter looked at her and said, that could be me. Thinking about the 5 paper dolls and the installation. So when the show goes down, it goes down in March, but in January, I'm going down there to do a workshop where that people can sign up to bring their children in. And I'm going to photograph the other children just because of what that little girl said. And they're going to have an opportunity to respond to the subject. And I'm going to then take those images and have that response embroidered into that piece because it's their voice. But I was really sort of moved by the fact that she could see herself in that work, eating her little grilled cheese sandwich. I think the hand went back up back there. Did you have another question? No? Which one is what?
Like your favorite period for your work.
Oh man, that's like picking a favorite kid. That's a tough question. I like different ones for different reasons. You know, the work with my family, my grandmother's gone now, and so that to me feels like it immortalized her, and to have her piece in a museum, I know it's going to be well taken care of for a long time, so I'm going to say that phase today. Ask me tomorrow, it might be something else. Yeah. My father passed right before I went to grad school. And my mom is like over the moon and constantly says, I wish he could have seen what you were about to do. And he was, you know, he wanted me to join the military and literally took me into a recruiting site. And I was like, look, I'm not joining unless I know I can have a camera in my hand and I'm gonna be in some action where I can take some pictures. And the recruiter was like, we can't really guarantee that. And I was like, I'm not doing it. And said, my husband's a painter. And we were dating, and he asked him if he ever thought about joining the military. But before he passed, he got to go to one of Cedric's shows. And he looked, he saw the price tags on some stuff, and he saw the little red dots, and he said, maybe this thing will work. Maybe you can raise a family. Maybe you'll be all right. So I think he would have been very proud, and I really feel his presence a lot. But my mom is just like, every book I'm in, she collects it. Every newspaper article, I have to send it to her, you know. She's very excited. Any others?
Okay, I think that's it for the evening. I just want to thank everybody for coming, and it's been a wild ride the last 48 hours. But if you have a chance, come back to campus and check out the show over at the Spin if you didn't get there today, and or the gallery in McDermott Library to see the wonderful show curated by my colleague Diane Durant. And thank you, Letitia Huckaby.
Thank you. My pleasure.